Yeah, it's interesting. Initially, when on the eighth day, when the Mishkan took on a status of permanence, when Aaron and his sons were installed, so the Torah tells us that Nodav Avihu, the two elder sons of Aaron, they had done something. There's a question of what they had done. And because of what they had done, they were struck down by God. And what followed. So there, Rashi cites Chazal, that Moshe says to Aaron, at the day of the installation of your children, when the Shekhinah was going to enter into the midst of the clouds, I knew that God's name would be sanctified and somebody's life would be taken, or some lives would be taken. And I thought it would either be you or I, because Hashem had told me initially when I was told to build the Mishkan, the Krovei HaKodesh. It's those who are closest to me, I will be sanctified. Meaning with the death of those who are closest to me, or most special, by taking their lives, I will be sanctified. So initially I thought that it would be you or I. Moshe was Shokol connected to Israel. He was the equivalent of Klaus, Aaron in certain context, he was the equivalent of Moshe. So you thought it would be you or I. So Moshe says, but I see that they are greater than we are, because I see that the Krovei HaKodesh, those who sanctified Hashem by taking their lives, was Nodav Avihu. But I was aware of this initially. And then Torah tells us, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron remained silent. So as I mentioned, the Medrash says, why did he remain silent? Because that was the nechama, that was the consolation. When he understood that the death of his children, the value was Be'krovei HaKodesh, that was his consolation. Until then, he didn't understand. But now that he understood that his children were the most special, and therefore they were taken, that's Be'krovei HaKodesh. So that was his consolation. That was the nechama. So Rameir Simcha over there explains what was the whole concept of Be'krovei HaKodesh. So the concept is that Hatzur Tomim Polo, God's justice, there's no iniquity in that justice. As special as you may be, but if you fail, God doesn't have any favoritism toward the tzaddik. The tzaddik is treated no less than the tzaddik, and even he's treated more exactly, the tzaddik. And therefore, although this was the only sin of Nodav Avihu, nevertheless, they would take it to show how precise, how exact Hashem's justice is. That even the most righteous are taken. That's Be'krovei HaKodesh. That is how Rameir Simcha explains it over there. We come to the story of the rock. There was no water. Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem says to Moshe, speak to the rock. He takes his mater, he takes his staff, and he strikes the rock rather than speaking to the rock. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I read the pasuk. V'yom Hashem el Moshe el Aaron, Yan lo imanti bi l'aknishen leiv b'nei Yisrael. You did not believe in me to sanctify me before the eyes of Bnei Yisrael. Lochein lo saviu sa'om hazeh hakol hazeh la'oretz Hashem asati lem. You had an opportunity to sanctify my name before that, you did not. Therefore, you're not qualified to bring this congregation into the land, which I gave them. Now, Hema Memorivo. These are the Memorivo. That's the water of the quarreling. So Rashi says, well, Paro originally had seen through his stargazing that Moshe ultimately, his demise will come through water. Meaning this was the water. It was not that he should be drowned in the Nile, but rather this was the Memorivo. Asher Rov b'nei Yisrael, which they quarreled with him as Hashem, v'yikodesh bom, and he was sanctified through them. So Rashi says, what's v'yikodesh bom? Shemesu Aaron, Shemesu Moshe v'Aaron lo yodam. They were sanctified through them, because through the water, that was the cause of the death of Moshe and Aaron. When Hashem renders justice, even to those who are the most holy, Yoru Miskadish Amrios. People revere him, and he becomes sanctified in the eyes of mankind. Chenu Omer, He quotes a pasuk, Nora Lakim Mikdoshecho. God is seen to be awesome from the holiest. Chino Omer. Listen to the pasuk, Bekrovei HaKodesh. As it says, through those who are closest to me, I will be sanctified. So this pasuk, originally, Moshe had said to Aaron, you know why your children were taken? Bekrovei HaKodesh. Over here, when the Torah says Aaron and Moshe were taken, this was an expression of Bekrovei HaKodesh. So Moshe and Aaron originally believed it would be either one of them, and it was neither then, but ultimately, this concept that God takes the most special to show that he doesn't differentiate between the most righteous and the less than the most righteous, Moshe and Aaron were the subject and the example of that, this concept. So although initially it didn't happen, but ultimately their lives ended in what context? Bekrovei HaKodesh. You know, sometimes a person has a certain sense, and it's not accurate, but ultimately it's pretty close to be accurate. Moshe said, I sense it's either you or I. It was them. But ultimately, it was them, both of them. Because both of them did not go into the land and passed away in the desert only because of this concept of a Bekrovei HaKodesh. That's Vayikodesh Bo. Balak, when the Jews were coming, Balak is as it says, is the king of Moab. And they were overwhelmed with fear. And therefore, he commissioned Bilam to curse the Jews because he felt he had no other alternative. So Rashi cites Chazal, who initially were the protectors of Canaan, all the nations of Canaan, Og and Sichel, the two giants. And Chazal say they literally would sit on the boundary, on the walls of the city, on the boundary of Canaan, and they'd watch to make sure no enemy should come in, and they were paid. All the nations of Canaan paid them protection money. So therefore, they felt secure. Nobody was able to penetrate this barrier. The two giants. What happens? The Jews come, and Moshe kills both of them. Now they're vulnerable. The Jews are coming full force. The Egyptians were destroyed. Their protectors are destroyed. We're vulnerable. So what do? They commissioned Bilam. The Bilam should curse the Jews. Because they felt that what is Moshe's ability, as we'll cite Rashi in a moment. They did the research on him. Moshe spent many years in Midian, and they found out that his power lies in his mouth. So therefore, and that's how he was able to bring about all the victories. We're going to commission somebody whose power also lies in his mouth. Bilam, he has the ability to curse. That's what they believed. Bilam was their ace in the hole, that he would be the one to protect them. But it's interesting. We mentioned this medrash in the past, that we speak about these wars. It's not only a physical battle; it's a battle between good and evil. We know that Mitzrayim, what they did to us when we spent those 210 years there, due to the bondage, we had mentioned that we find that Yechezkel Novi, when he depicts the Egyptians, he refers to them as Bisara Chamor Bisorim. Their flesh is like the flesh of the donkey. And the Maral explains, what do you mean that donkey? I mean, Egypt was the most sophisticated civilization. They controlled the world. Mitzrayim. So he explained that the word chamor, their flesh is like flesh of donkey. The word chamor, the word chomer, means material, physical. Of all the 70 nations of the world, the root nations of the world, there was no nation that was more devoid of spirituality than the Egyptian people. So therefore, they're quantified as chamor, chomer. They're more chomer, they're more material, more physical than any other nation. And that's why we went there, because there's the least amount of spirituality. That's where the greatest force to counter Kedusha is there. And that was part of our involvement as a Klal Yisrael. We had to be there. But the effect was, what was the effect of that? The effect was we reached Mem Teshari Tuma, reached the 49th level of contamination, which we nearly went into the oblivion. The Hashem wouldn't have taken us at that moment. And there's a Beis Halevi who explains and shows from Psukim that the only reason why the Klal Yisrael was susceptible to the Chet Egel, because there were microscopic traces of that evil, which we were not fully purged of, wasn't expunged from us. As a result of that, that's the reason why we succumbed to the temptation of the Chet Egel. So therefore, Egypt has that level of representation. So when we left Egypt and Egypt was destroyed, and it says Lo Nishba Me'ad Echad, and the sea closed on all of them, that was the cap on that representation of evil. Mitzrayim became history. In terms of representation of evil, that evil no longer existed. Now, what about Sichon and Og? So really, the battle over there wasn't only a physical battle. It was a battle of what? Of good and evil. And good won out at the end of the day. As it says, we left beyond Rama. We left with glory. We didn't leave as fugitives escaping. We left with glory, with the killing of the firstborn. As says, Ubelahei Mitzrayim Eser Shvotim. All the deities of Egypt were destroyed. That was the spiritual counterforce. The Kedusha, they were all destroyed. That was leaving Egypt. What about Sichon and Og? In terms of their representation of evil, what was their representation of evil? So the Medrash Tanchuma tells us that in terms of the representation of evil, they had another aspect of the same evil. They were more formidable than all the armies of Egypt. It was more difficult to destroy Og and Sichon than Egypt. That's how secure they were in terms of their level of representation. So be able to destroy Sichon and Og was nearly an impossibility. But of course, Moshe was Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem says, don't be fearful. You'll destroy them. Now, so it was more difficult to destroy Og and Sichon than Egypt. Now, we find that what happened after the sea closed on Egypt? Moshe said, Oz Yoshir. He sang the song of the sea, and Klal Yisrael sang it after him. They gave Shira that this evil came to an end. What should have been after the victory of Og and Sichon? Shira should have been sung. Moshe Rabbeinu did not sing Shira. Chazal don't fault him for it, but Shira, when such a level of accomplishment comes back, you have to sing Shira, like Krias Yamsuf. But because Moshe did not sing Shira, who sang the Shira of that? Sichon Melech Og Melech HaBoshan. On Shabbos, we say Kilu Lom Chasto, Hod Lashem Kitov Chasto. Then we say many things. Forever is God's chesed. Sichon Melech Amori Kilom Chasto, Og Melech HaBoshan Kilom Chasto. He said 26 Kilom Chastos to express that he came to express the Shira, which Moshe Rabbeinu did not say. Shira has to be said. When that event takes place, you must identify it as Shira. That good was victorious over evil. That's the Medrash Tanchuma. So after Og and Sichon, although Moshe did not say Shira, David said Shira on behalf of Moshe, on behalf of Klal Yisrael, to identify and quantify what happened over there. The Gemara tells us in Chelek, in Sanhedrin, that Chishyo Melech Yehuda was meant to be Mashiach, and over there, it was meant to be, he was supposed to be Gog and Magog. What does it say? And Sanhedrin was supposed to be Gog and Magog, the Armageddon. This was the last battle before the coming of bringing the world to perfection. And in one swoop, at midnight, the camp of Sanhedrin was destroyed. And that was supposed to be the end. And Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda, was meant to be Mashiach. What happened? The Midas Adin came to Hashem and said, he doesn't make the grade. Why doesn't he make the grade? Because he didn't say Shira. He should have said Shira, and he did not say Shira. And because he did not say Shira, he doesn't qualify for Mashiach. So what did Hashem say? we're putting it on hold. Although Chizkiah had the qualification, but because he failed in this aspect, he was not Mashiach. When you have this level of victory over good over evil, you must say Shira. Moshe said Shira at the Yamsuf. David said Shira on behalf of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Sichon and Og. This was supposed to be the end, the final putting the lid on evil, because Shira was not said. You have to quantify the event. Chizkiah Melech Yehuda was not Mashiach for that reason. So what was the defeat of Og and Moshe? That's Og and Sichon, just to bring out the point. Bolek understood exactly what he had and what no longer existed. The force that's the counterforce, the Kedusha, which was meant to destroy Klal Yisrael, or at least keep them at bay, that force no longer existed. Therefore, he was terrified, because he felt now Kedusha is going to overwhelm evil. You know, we say in Psukei de Zimra, it's very interesting. We say by Yor of David, Atu Hashem Elokim Asher B'chat B'Avrom, V'otzeisu Murkazdim. You Hashem Elokim who chose Avrom, this is before the name change, and you took him out of the kiln of Kazdim, V'samta Shol Avraham. Even though he did not become Avrom immediately. He first became Avrom at the age of 99. But as a result of you taking him out of the Ur Kasdim, meaning that he's willing to die to sanctify your name, in the merit of that, you took him out of the Ur Kasdim, the kiln of Kasdim, V'samta Shmo Avrom. And therefore he merited to be Avraham, and you found his heart faithful to you. Okay? What exactly does that mean? So the Medrash tells us Avram Avinu had no obligation to give his life and not bow to the idol. The whole concept of if a Jew is confronted, either bow to the idol or die, that's the obligation of what? Of Kiddush Hashem. A Jew has an obligation to sanctify God's name, even to give your life. A Ben Noach, a Noahide has no such obligation. Avram Avinu had no obligation to give his life. But despite that, he said, I will give my life. I will not bow to something which is false. And he was willing to die, to go into the kiln. So the Medrash says, before he went to the kiln, Hashem said to Avram, you have a choice. If you don't go into the kiln, you're going to be special. But you'll be like a plank of wood that has something etched on it. But wood, over time, whatever's etched on it will actually fade. But if you give your life for me, then you're going to be like a wall that's able to repel every attack. You're going to be permanent, you're going to be eternal, if you give me your life for me. To go into the kiln. Avram says, I'm going to the kiln. But that's what Hashem communicated to Avram at that moment. I'm going to the kiln because my value is only, as you're eternal, I want to be part of that eternity. And he went into the kiln. This is Avraham. So why did he merit to be Avraham? Avram is the Krieg, is not the person who's the eternal, the founding father of Klal Yisrael. Abraham is the founding father. Abraham is the one who was circumcised. That's Ramach. He became that with Ramach. Atu Hashem el Moshe. It says so as Avram mi Ur Kasdim. The Samta Shema, because he came out of Ur Kasdim, he became. So what does he represent now? He's now the counterforce to evil. Until now, he didn't have that identity. But because he became Avraham and he's the founding father of the Jewish people, what is his level of representation now? He represents Kedusha in the world. He's the counterforce. So what does it say right afterwards? Because of that, he entered into a covenant to give him the land of Canaan, the 7 nations of Canaan. What are the 7 nations of Canaan? There's alocha los chai kol neshama. We had to annihilate all the nations of Canaan because what was their level of representation? Their representation was evil. But why did he have the ability to be able to bring that about? Because you were Avram who went into the Orkazdim, Avraham, because he became Avraham, who was the representation of the Ramach, the totality of what Kedusha is. Therefore, it's V'choretzim Abris. exactly what we're talking about. So the Klal Yisrael is the counterforce to evil. So Ogun and Sichon were the counterforce to us, even to a greater degree than Egypt. And that's the Chazal. It was more difficult to destroy Ogun and Sichon than what? Than Egypt. Now we're able to understand what went on in the desert with the Meraglim. When the Meraglim came back and they saw giants, they said it's a land that devours its inhabitants. They understood that they believed that they didn't have the worthiness, even though we defeated Mitzrayim. Hashem took us out. You know why? Because to be able to defeat Mitzrayim, you didn't need the worthiness that you needed to defeat the giants and to overcome the 7 nations of Canaan. It's a different dimension of evil. But that's where they failed, because Hashem says, I will take them all out. And as Moshe Rabbeinu took out Og, Sichon, and Og, you have nothing to worry about. But that's the basis why the Meraglim failed, because they believed they weren't sufficiently worthy to have the ability, they didn't have a representation of that Kedusha to be able to be victorious over the evil. But they don't see evil as what evil is. If you understand what Kedusha is, then you understand what evil is. But if you're on the other side of the fence, it's something you cannot tolerate. Now, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah, not in Hilchos Deos, he writes that just as you have Cholei Haguf, you have Rambam was a doctor. It's just as you have Cholei Haguf, you have physical ailments, and he shows how sick a person can be. That a person, if he has a certain chemical deficiency, a vitamin deficiency, when he eats something sweet, it tastes bitter. And when he tastes something bitter, it tastes sweet. And you crave to eat things which are inedible. People crave to eat clay. They crave to eat carbon. It's inedible. It's only because they have some kind of serious physical deficiency. That's why they have all these cravings. This is identically, a person who is cholei hanefesh, a person who has a sick soul, that his soul is sick, he cannot tolerate Kedusha, cannot tolerate spirituality. And that's the Cholei HaNefesh. And he says, and that's why at the time of the Churban Abayis, when the Navi gives the Musar since you do tshuva, and the Beis HaMikdash will not be destroyed, it says over there, it said, they saw Ores, Choshech, Choshech, and Zor. Light they called darkness, and darkness was light. They said, no, that's not what it's all about. Rabbi, it's not what you say. Well, glory is not what you say. Glory is what we say. Now you have the $500 million yacht, that's glory. Hashem says, no, that's not glory. The yacht you could sink. Kedusha you can't sink. You have got it? It's a whole different reality. But if you're on the other side of the fence, on the other side of the equation, you believe that's what it's all about. And the Kedusha interferes and does not allow you to have the upper hand. Therefore, you want to destroy it. That's why Bilam was the one who advised Paro. What was the final solution? If Hashem wouldn't have taken us out at that last moment, we would have gone into the oblivion. Bilam knew exactly what he was doing. And Bilam failed. And because he failed, that's the reason why he wanted to destroy us even to a greater degree than Balak. Because here he was disgraced in the eyes of the world. Here he said, no Jew will escape from Egypt. And Moshe, when he fled, everybody couldn't understand how he's able to flee. And not only did Moshe flee, 600,000 men above the age of 20 fled. Not only they fled, they left, the gates were wide open. How is it possible? Bilam was disgraced. And because he was disgraced, and Bilam, his representation was evil, as a result of that, his axe that he had to grind was the only way he's able to retain his position of who he is. He has to destroy the Jew to prove who he is. And ultimately, he was destroyed himself. And who is the counterforce to Bilam? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet who ever lived among the Jews. Look, come Navi Kamoshe B'Yisrael. There was no greater prophet among Jews as Moshe Rabbeinu. But the inference is among Jews, but among the nations, who was the prophet as great as Moshe Rabbeinu? That was Bilam. So Bilam was the counterforce to Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why we find that after Bilam was killed, Moshe Rabbeinu was taken out. Moshe Rabbeinu could not continue living. It was in the 40th year. The battle with Midian. Bilam was killed. Soon afterwards, Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. Because whenever you have a counterbalance, you have to have the other side of the equation. And if it's not there, the world can't continue. I said many times, Alan remembers this. The day that Avram died,
Nimrod died.
passed away. Who was killed on that day?
Nimrod.
Nimrod. Nimrod was the counterforce to Avram Avinu. Nimrod is the one who threw Avram into the kiln. The day that Avram passed away, Nimrod was killed. How was he killed? Esau killed Nimrod when he came back, and it says he was weary and tired from the field. He had come back that day. He killed Nimrod. The day Nimrod dies, Avram can't continue, because you have to have a counterforce such as Nimrod to counter Avram's influence.
And so, if I had a second question, understand that concept.
When we discussed about the Ari Miklot, the cities of refuge. Now, the Transjordan side was the location which we conquered. That was Ogan Sichel territory. This is before we crossed the Jordan, the Yarden. We find, since it's relative to Eretz Yisrael, it's a much smaller area. Yet you have Ari Miklot, you have cities of refuge on the Transjordan side, the equivalent of all Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara is why. So the Gemara says, because in the Transjordan side, Eber Yarden, Shchichi Rotzchi. They're more murderous. Yeah. It's when you kill inadvertently. Meaning, this issue, the need for the city refuge is needed to a greater degree on the Transjordan side than Eretz Yisrael. What's it all about? What did that represent? What was the Transjordan side? What did it represented? That was the location of Sichon and Og. Even though they were removed, but nevertheless, that location had a representation of what that evil was. And therefore, we were more vulnerable in that area to we didn't have the clarity, and therefore inadvertent lives were taken inadvertently. Therefore, you needed greater locations. You need more locations for refuge, because murder was more common, was more prevalent there than in Eretz Yisrael.
Rabbi, in the past,
I just want to mention, like I mentioned last week in Meimed Orach Chaim HaKodesh, that the body is the receptacle for the neshama, and therefore when the neshama leaves the body, there's a trace of Kedusha. Identically, Og and Sichon, because of who they were, even though they were removed, but their evil was so intense, even more overwhelming than Egypt, there was a trace of that left there. So when Ruvain and Gad, the Chatzi Shev Menashe, took that location impacted on them, and therefore they were the first ones that went into exile. The first ones when Sancheirav exiled the 10 lost tribes, the first to be exiled were the Transjordan group, because they were impacted, they were undermined more than the Jews in Canaan. Because the traces of what Soich Sichon and Og was there was not in Eretz Yisrael.
Rabbi, what's the
We became aware of what happened. The Jewish community throughout the world was terrified, because the Arab news, they said they're digging mass graves in Tel Aviv, 20,000 casualties. I mean, everything was false, and it was terrifying. And then we find out what happened. Literally, miracle, 6-day war. 6 days, it's over. Destroyed all the Arab armies. And they had pictures of the prisoners of war marching in the desert, wearing that without shoes, so on and so forth. Rabbi Rav Kalatsky said, and if you realize the Baal Tshuva movement in Israel started at that point. People started, all these backpackers, these hippies, they started to gravitate towards Israel. These Jewish kids, these teenagers, these college kids. It was like an eye opener. Rav Kalatsky said then, that if the Jews would have said Shira then, and it would have been spoken about and quantified what happened on an international level, all Jews would have spoken and appreciated. He believed Mashiach would have come then. But because it was not appreciated for what it was, and it was not acknowledged, that's when Mashiach did not come then. That was his comment that he made then.
And now?
It's not comparable. It's not
Oh,
comparable.
I understand.
Maybe this is maybe, a notch towards that.
Right,
That's all it is.
okay,
There's plenty yet to go.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Parshas Bolok. Vayar Bolok ben Sipor. Eis kol asher also Yisrael Amori. Bolok, the son of Sipor, had seen all that Yisrael did to the Amori, to the Amorites. Sichom el Amori. Rashi. Vayar Bolok is kol asher also Yisrael Amori. Omar. What did he say? Elu shnei melochim shayinu betuchim aleim. Lo amdu bifneim. These two kings that we relied upon them were not able to stand in the way of the Jews. Onu, alachs kam v'kamo. So what's our chance of survival? If these two giants weren't able to withstand the Jews, so what's our chance? Lefichach v'yogar Moab. Therefore, they were paralyzed. They were overwhelmed with fear. V'yogar, loshin mora kamo guru lochem. It's like an overwhelming level of fear that literally become incapacitated because of the fear. The Yagar Moab, they are old. And Moab was overwhelmed with fear because of the people. Kirafu, was there many? Yagar's Moab named soil, and Moab became disgusted. They became frustrated. When does a person reach a point of disgust? When you don't know where to turn. You're frustrated. You've turned every stone and you don't know where to turn. It's just like by Egypt. It says, the Egyptians, as much as they tried to annihilate us through the bondage, we just kept increasing in number. It says, they became frustrated with us. Here they're frustrated, they don't know what to do. They became disgusted with themselves. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, why are they speaking to Midian? This call, this assembly, they lapped our environment, all that's around us. As the ox, when he grazes, he extracts all the vegetation off the ground. Wherever ox grazes, nothing grows there afterwards. Because it's through his saliva, the ox extracts all the nutrients of that location, then nothing grows there afterwards. That's exactly what the Jews, where the Jews go, once they pass through something, it's scorched earth. Nothing will grow there again. Nothing will happen there again. Egypt was decimated. That's no longer Egypt. Wherever they go, they wiped out the Transjordan side totally. Sichamo, they conquered all the cities. They say, and Moab was chosen. Balak to be the king of Moab at that time. Let's see, Rashi. El Zikne Mijan. Although Me'olam Hoyusolim says, all of a sudden we see this kind of alliance between Moab and Midian, but they were enemies, they were arch enemies. Shenemar Hamakis Midian b'stei Moab. They had smitten Moab, Midian in the fields of Moab. Shabo Midian shel Moab. Al Moab l'milchama el Miyosa shel Yisrael. But as a result of being fearful of the Jews, also shel Me'im, they created an alliance. The Medrash says something beautiful. There's an expression, they fight like dogs. And dogs fight, they fight like dogs. So it says, Moshel na dog domer. What is it now? There were two sheepdogs. A shepherd has a flock, he has a sheepdog. What is the purpose of a sheepdog? The sheepdog, because when the wolf is coming near the flock, the dog starts barking, and sometimes the barking of the dog chases away the wolf. And he's able to preserve the the flock, or he alerts the shepherd fights off the wolf. What happened if the wolf is overwhelming and the dog doesn't? The dog has a problem because the wolf is going to kill the dog. So what do the dogs do? Let's say there's a wolf coming and one dog is not enough to attack the wolf. So the dogs say to one another, although we always fight like dogs and we're at each other's neck, unless we join forces, the wolf is going to kill each of us individually. So we might as well join forces and kill the wolf. That's the analogy in the Midrash. They were arch enemies, but they understood now if they're divided, they're not going to survive. They have to join forces. Only through joining forces, then they'll be able to defeat the Jews. Similar to the dogs. So although why did they go to Mijan? They saw the Jews were succeeding and victorious on a supernatural level, not the conventional way. This victory came not through conventional means. The leader of the Jewish people, he was raised in Midian. We'll do our due diligence. We'll find out what exactly is his ability. You know, what's mami dosu? What's his midah? You know, we speak about person's attributes. An attribute is called a midah. What's a midah? The word midah means a measurement. You measure a person based on who he is. Through one's attributes, that's a midah. Because that's an evaluation of a person, what he is. Mami dosu. How do we evaluate? What is it all about? That's the midah. Omru lehem ein koch elo b'piv. So they said his power lies in his mouth. Omraf anu novu aleim ba'odom shekocha b'piv. So we're going to bring somebody against him. Also, his power lies in his mouth. Okay, now it's interesting. I mean, in Midian, how did they see his power lies in his mouth? So evidently, there must have been events that happened there. That Moshe Rabbeinu, he had said things or whatever it is, and he was quantified as that. It wasn't through physical might, but rather through his words. This is the Koko Yaakov. Now, how did Moshe kill the Egyptian? He killed him he did not physically hit him. Right? It says, when Dasnat Viram says, hello, get out to Omer. You mean you're going to kill us as you killed the Egyptian Omer through words? So it says he killed him with the Shem Hashem. That's how we killed the Egyptian. I mean, they could have done the due diligence finding out from Egypt. How did he kill the Egyptian? The taskmaster. Killed him through his mouth. But again, first of all, that event maybe was not publicized. This does not Viram saw it. So they saw, because they saw what happened, therefore they informed him. But the Egyptians didn't know that Moshe's power was in his mouth. Therefore, he fled. But Midian, that he was there for maybe 60 years, and he had a certain degree of recognition there, and he was the son-in-law of Yisro, who was a prominent person, and they understood this man, he's something, he's able to deal with every issue. Therefore, it was there, but we're not aware exactly how it expressed itself, that his power was in his mouth.
Rav, I have a question.
Yeah.
In the prior parsha that we went through a whole discussion with Sichon, who was an Amorite, and that the Jews couldn't conquer the land. Originally, it was Moab, was conquered by Amorites. The whole story. So Balak, being the king of Moab, should have known that Israel was not going to destroy Moab because it had a tradition that it could not destroy Moab.
Okay. Correct. Very good. Right now, we just ran out of time. We're going to leave it for tomorrow. The Medrash discusses your point. I'll just give you a little.
Yeah, what was he so afraid of? Right.
A little inkling. Ammon and Moab were the children of Lot, right? They came about through incest.
Right.
The younger daughter was the mother of Ammon. Moab was the older daughter. The younger daughter, she named her son a name that did not identify that it came through incest. The older daughter, she made it public knowledge that this child is the child of my father. Moav means may of.
My
It's
father.
my father.
Right.
It was a total breach of what? Of modesty. You see, things happen, okay? It happens. And you justified it. But do you make it public knowledge that the child is the child of your father? So because of that, there's a difference. Although we weren't permitted to take the territory of Moab and Sichon, Ammon, we just got to stay away from. We can't even intimidate them. We can't harass them. But Moab, we could harass them because she lacked in this characteristic of modesty, and there was this certain brazenness in her. It's termed relative to what she did. Therefore, you could harass them. So because when we came near Moab, they were intimidating us. We could harass them, although we couldn't conquer the land. That's the reason why. That's why they were intimidated. Well, we'll see the Medrash inside tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, we're ready to start Shinut Ches. Okay, this the laws of Bishul. Now, it's interesting. If one cooks on Shabbos, even deliberately, you're not permitted to benefit. A Jew is not permitted to eat that food. Inadvertently, we'll discuss it's a machlokes tanoim. For the one who cooked, maybe he has to wait till after Shabbos. Others maybe on Shabbos, yes. But all these laws, whether it's permitted or not permitted, are these Torah laws that rabbinic laws. Zemar says in 2 locations that they're only rabbinical. On a Torah level, even if a person cooks deliberately on Shabbos, he's violating Shabbos, you're permitted to eat the food. Because it says Shabbos is Kodesh. Shabbos is holy, so the inference is Shabbos is holy, but if one does an action which violates the Shabbos, that action has no relevance to restriction. There's no restriction on that. It's permitted. So all these laws, if it's inadvertent, deliberate, or whatever it is, these are all rabbinic laws, they're not Torah laws. Okay? That's where we begin. Hamvasha b'Shabbos, one who cooks on Shabbos. Or any other one of the 39 malachos. B'mezid. If you violated Shabbos deliberately, also lowly olam. Yeah, that person can never benefit from that malacha. He cooked food deliberately, he can never benefit from that. V'la'achera muter l'motzei Shabbos. Miyad. The others, immediately after Shabbos is over, they're permitted to eat that food. Immediately. Now, even though, to a degree, they're benefiting from Shabbos, you'd say, which we'll discuss, maybe you'd say they should wait after Shabbos the amount of time that it would take to bring about that result. Let's see, that food that was cooked, it took 2 hours to cook that food. And I cooked for 2 hours. So maybe 2 hours after Shabbos, you'll be able to eat that food. Because as a result of that, you're not benefiting from the malacha that was done on Shabbos. Because otherwise we're concerned, if we allow you to eat immediately afterwards, maybe people will see the value, although Shabbos was violated, you're benefiting from Shabbos. It's called Kedusha Yasu. Wait the amount of time that it takes. The Gemara says, and that's the way we rule, that if you have a bathhouse in a community, and the bathhouse keeper is a Gentile, the majority of people in the community are Gentiles, are goyim. So he heats the bathhouse on Shabbos for his clientele. Who are the clientele? They're not Jews. A Jew is permitted to use that bathhouse immediately after Shabbos. Why? Because when the bathhouse keeper heated the water on Shabbos, he heated it for non-Jews. Therefore, a Jew could benefit immediately after Shabbos. What about if the majority of Jews in the community, people in the community are Jews, the patrons are Jews? So when he heated that bathhouse, who did he heat it for? He heated it for his constituency. The Jews don't go to the bathhouse on Shabbos, but he wants that bathhouse should be immediately available immediately after Shabbos. Jews are not permitted to use that bathhouse until a period of time passes where you could heat that water after Shabbos, and only then are they permitted to use it. Otherwise, it's considered like they're benefiting from something that was done on their behalf on Shabbos. And that's by a Gentile, not a Jew didn't do it. Okay? That's called Kedusha Yasu. You have to wait the amount of time that it will take to bring about that same result. So we'll see. But the Mechaber, this is a position in its Machlokes Tanoim. The Mezid, the person himself can never benefit from it. Others, it's permitted immediately after Shabbos. Ubishogeg. What about a person violates the Melacha Bishogeg? Inadvertently, he wakes up Shabbos morning, he thinks it's Sunday, he cooks food. Bishogeg. Also, Bo Biyom. Gam Lacheri. Others on Shabbos, they cannot eat that food. Why? Because Shabbos was violated. You cannot benefit on Shabbos from a melacha that was done on Shabbos. However, le'erev, mutar lo, gam lo miyad. But after Shabbos, even the one who cooked inadvertently, although he violated and he has liability of a chatos, he's permitted to benefit immediately after Shabbos. Because there's no reason to penalize him if he doesn't deliberately. We don't want you to benefit from what you did, that you did something wrong. But if he did it inadvertently, no Jew could benefit from a melacha that's done on Shabbos. But immediately afterwards, there's no basis to penalize him because it was done inadvertently. What about if he told the non-Jew to do it on his behalf? We'll see. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Hamavasho.
So, Rabbi.
Wait, let's see the Mishnah Berurah first. Okay, then they'll ask. Hamavasho. First, where did they cook in the Mishkan? You know, it's not they cooked food. There were dyes that were needed to dye the various materials, right? Whatever the color was it tcheles? So the dyes had to be cooked. That's where the malach of cooking had relevance to the building of the Mishkan. So he says, if one cooks food, or samonim, or dyes, or hamachamim esamayim, you warm water. Person eats water. Rotzaloma after mayim roy lishtio below bishul. Although, regardless of bishul akum, if a non-Jew heats water for you, you're permitted to drink the water. Why? So the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, because anything which is potable or edible in the raw state, in the uncooked state, the contribution of the cooking is not that valuable. So you'd say maybe cooking, if something's not edible in the raw state, it enhances it, okay. But water is as potable when it's not cooked. And when it is cooked, so maybe you should be permitted to drink the water. So we say, no, even though you can drink the water uncooked, you're not permitted to benefit when it's cooked. This is because there's some added value for the cooking. The cooking adds. You know, cooked water has a different is impacted by the cooking. It's interesting. When we speak about the 39 melachos, you have one melacha which covers two things. What's the difference between baking and cooking? Cooking is where there's liquid involved. Baking is it dries it, and that's how it comes about. One is dry, one is wet. Cooking, the liquid flows through the item that's being cooked, and that's how the item being cooked becomes more edible or becomes more perfected. Baking is the other way. By drying it, that makes it more edible. That enhances it. But it's the same melacha. Bishul and ofe is the same melacha. So if a person goes and cooks and bakes on Shabbos inadvertently, how many chatos does he have to bring? How many sin offerings? He only has to bring one. Why? Because he violated the same melacha multiple times. But one's cooking, one's baking. The answer is because it's classified, it's one melacha, baking and cooking. Okay? Baking is a semblance of cooking. Elishafihu bepas. Baking is something that has relevance to bread or like cake. Ubishul b'shar dvorim. Bishul is other items. Hamatich echod mimini matochos kosher. Person melts metal. Take metal and you heat it. And through the heating process, you cause it to soften. Or you heat it and it becomes a gachelis. It becomes like a coal. Hareze tolas mavashel. That's a derivative of cooking. Because through the cooking process, heating it, you're softening the metal, then now it becomes pliable. And the Rambam says, you're softening something hard. The Gemara says in Klal Godel that if you take wet wood, damp wood, and you put it in an oven to dry, because you want to have dry wood, you're in violation of Mavashim. Why? So from there we see that you take something which is soft, and through the heat, you dry it and it becomes hard, that's Mavashim. Well, you take something hard and you soften it, and it becomes liquid. So if you take metal and you soften it, because before it was hard, that's Mavashim. Hard, taking something hard, softening, or soft, hardening it, that's Mavashim. Okay? Now, there's a whole discussion initially when the electricity came about, and you had all bulbs were incandescent bulbs. A bulb had a filament in it. Now, when you put on the electricity, why does the bulb glow? Because the filament is heated to a certain point, and the filament glows, and that's the source of light. And when you had an incandescent bulb, the malacha was mivashel. I'm not even talking about Aish. Why was it mivashel? Because why over time did a bulb burn out? Because when you heat that filament for so many hours, eventually the filament totally breaks. It's what we call metal fatigue. It's heated so many times it can tolerate heat. After a while, the metal, that filament is actually no longer exists because it's been heated multiple times. That's so. And an incandescent bulb, everybody agreed. When you put on that bulb, put on that light, you're in violation of Vashem. So then came, what about when you have fluorescent bulbs? Fluorescent, there's no filament. What's the malacha? Right? So you'd say, well, you're creating light. What's the malach creating light? It's what? No light. No light is only in Israel. On Yom Tov. Why are you not permitted to strike a match on Yom Tov? Right? Kindling is permitted on Yom Tov. Transferring of fire is permitted on Yom Tov. But yet striking a match is not permitted. It's only rabbinical. Because that's called no light. Because that's called creating fire. You're not permitted to create. But if you have an existing fire and you want to transfer it to another location, let's say you have a match, you have something burning, and you want to take a match and put it to the fire, and you ignite the match, not a problem. It's only if you strike the match, which you create the fire, that's no allowed. So if you have a fluorescent bulb, there's no filament, and you just have the gas in the bulb, in the glass cylinder, and when the gases are heated, all of a sudden it begins glowing. That's how it works, the fluorescent. So what malach did you do? It's not simple. So they say it's Aish. Is it Aish? Where's the fire? So the famous position of the Chazon Ish, it's binyan. You're in violation of building. Why? By creating a circuit. That's called binyan. Because when you create the circuit, that's what allows things to happen. That was the Chazon Ish's position. So according to Chazon Ish, even if anything, an LED bulb or whatever it is, creating a circuit, that's binyan. Otherwise, what would the malacha be? LED. I mean, there's no filament. There's nothing there, right? Okay, so that's discussed. She's saying over here, speaking about bishul, causing something to soften or something soft to harden. So baking is something soft hardens. Cooking is something solid. Through cooking, through water, you're softening. And the softening it has the effect on whatever you're cooking. That's the concept.
So, Rabbi, creating the fire, is it Darabanan?
No, not creating the fire. No, you create a fire that's
when you light the match.
Havora. That's Havora. That's Havora. Havora. It's a different malacha.
So I misunderstood what you
And
said.
so what lecture, who said electricity is fire? Where do you see fire?
No. When the Rav said that when you light a match, that's
Yontif.
considered
Oh,
a.
Havor is permitted on Yom Tov. Havor is permitted on Yom Tov. I'm talking Yom Tov. On Yom
No, I
Tov.
understand, but when you light the match, when you start the fire,
So there's nothing, what's the provision? You
so
created fire. What's
that's
wrong?
what
Havor
I'm
is
asking.
permitted.
That's what I'm asking. Is that so?
That's-
We are
that's
allowed.
rabbinical.
We're not allowed to start a fire, though. We have to
Why?
transfer the
That's
fire.
the question. Why? Why are you not permitted to create a fire? That's all I'm explaining to you. It's only rabbinical.
No.
It's called Bond. You're creating something that didn't exist. Transferring fire on Yom Tov is permitted. But striking a match where you're creating the fire, that should not be permitted.
But deraisa, you'd be able to do that.
Yes. Midoraisa, you're permitted to strike the match. It's only rabbinical. What's the halacha? I mean, it's based on the Gemara and Shabbos. If you have snow, and you take the snow and you put it between your hands, and the warmth of your hands turns the snow into water, what's the prohibition? So the Gemara says it's no allowed.
Yeah.
Because you're creating water. Even though snow is water, it's condensed, it's frozen. Or take ice, put it between your hand, and you cause it to melt because it's between your hand and you're doing it. So the ice should melt. It's awesome drabono. Rabbinically, you're not permitted to do it because that's nomad. You're creating something that you take something that didn't exist, and it appears as if you're creating something. That
So if you put ice in a cup,
because it's not noticeable. It's not noticeable. But it's not simple. What about if you leave an ice cube in an empty glass?
right? Exactly.
And the water accumulates.
Exactly.
Since there you did not create it. It happened by itself, therefore you can benefit on Shabbos. So what about if you take an ice cube, put it in a hot cup of tea, which is a kli shlishi, so it's not cooking. Since over there, because it's not, we'll see later, it's not noticeable. Because when the ice melts, the liquid of the ice, when it's liquefied, it's not noticed because immediately it intermingles with the tea, therefore it's not allowed. Therefore, even rabbinically, it's okay. But let's say you have a hot glass.
Same thing about the
hot glass. Hot glass. And you take an ice cube, put it in an empty hot glass. There you wouldn't be permitted to benefit from the water. Because there, when you put that ice in that hot glass, you're causing that cube to melt. And the water that's melting is noticeable because it's an empty glass.
What's the difference whether it's noticeable or not, Rabbi? You're still doing it.
Because it appears. It's what appears what's happening.
You can't see the circuit or the binion in the floor.
That's a doraisa. This what we're talking now is rabbinical. You're not permitted to build on Shabbos. Creating a circuit according to Chazon Ish, that's called building. It has nothing to do with what appears, what you see, what you don't see. It's just a reality.
And so it's a derisa, the fluorescent bulb.
According to Chazon Ish, should be a doraisa.
And according to person,
it's not simple what the malach is. Not simple what the malach is.
What did Rabbi Moshe Feinstein say about this? He follows the Chazon Ish. I'm trying to understand this.
I mean, rabbinically, definitely you're not permitted to do it. You're not. It's no. Minimally, it's rabbinical. Minimally, it's rabbinical. I'll tell you a story. When they first brought electricity, when they first had the bulb, and they brought it, and it was in Vilna and in Brisk, people thought, what anybody understand what electricity is? So Reb Chaim Brisker and Reb Chaim Ozer, when they first brought it there, when they made Havdalah, they said Bore Mireish on an electric bulb. Because they wanted to communicate to the people that the bulb is fire. If you could say Bore Mireish on the bulb, that's Aish. As a result of that, nobody's going to put the electricity on. Nobody's going to flick the switch to put a light bulb on Shabbos. They did it intentionally for that reason. If it's Aish, you could say Bor Reish. If that's the case, that's something we don't do on Shabbos.
So if you want iced coffee on Shabbos, totally fine.
Correct.
Taking 8 ice cubes, putting it in kli shlishi coffee, no problem.
Correct. Jay reminds me of Rav Steinman once said, in his life, he never tasted ice cream. He has got it. Iced coffee, you know, you think about when you go to 7-Eleven, wherever they buy the iced coffee. Okay, okay, Jay, we understand, okay? Now I understand when I host you as my guest, I have to make sure I have iced coffee available.
It's after July 4th.
Okay, I heard they have a discount now after July 4th.
Rebbe,